Welcome to this episode of the LiveWell Hervey podcast. Of course, that is powered by Social Shift, making change together for our region. And I'm joined today by Melissa Guilfoyle, who is one of the leading lawyers that we have here on the Fraser Coast. And we're going to explore all things legal about your life and how you can make those nice and simple for yourself, and how you can live a better life knowing that you're secure with all your legal obligations. But not only that, we're going to talk about some topical things that are happening in the community at the moment. How are you, Mel?
Very well, thank you.
That's good. Why don't we start off with the hot point that you can't turn the news on every night and not hear about, which is youth crime. And, I've been to various events around the Fraser Coast, and I think these things might be largely region by region, and listen to different people say that, that yes, there's a problem in our region, and no, there's not, and all the rest of it. But I guess you're at the coalface of seeing what happens, what people go through court for, and how often. What's your, I suppose, helicopter view of what youth crime is doing on the Fraser Coast?
So it is a very topical question, obviously. I don't see it as a youth crime problem as much of it as it is a crime problem, that we have crime in every region.
Yeah.
And it's always been a problem. It's just how we address crime and how we address it for different areas of the community. We've got crime problems everywhere.
Yep.
We've got legislation to protect people from harm, which is where crime comes from. And so it's about finding ways to properly address that criminal behaviour. So there's a few schools of thought on addressing criminal behaviour, and that could be punitive or it could be rehabilitative. And the punitive options are obviously what the community's really screaming about at the moment, is they're not feeling like people are being punished enough for the crimes. Whereas from my perspective, I think we need to be focusing more on rehabilitation and the root cause of the criminal behaviour.
It's really interesting comments that you make, because I do hear a lot of school of thought around the fact that you just can't jail your way out of problems. And more interesting, I would say, is that from my perspective, what you're saying to me is there's always been crime about, and it's perpetrated by all people of different ages. But right at the moment, for some particular reason, perhaps it's political, that the spotlight is disproportionately on youth crime, and it may not necessarily be any worse or any better than it always has been.
And I haven't reviewed the statistics to see whether there's any disproportionality in terms of the level of offending or the increase in offending at the moment. But one of the things, I am a general lawyer, so I do focus on a lot of areas of the law, and conveyancing is one of those. So I'm seeing a lot of people moving to the region. I'm seeing a lot of people, the population increasing. So when the population increases, you've got more people here and potentially more people that are susceptible to engaging in those behaviours. So it's not necessarily that crime as a per capita is increasing. It's just becoming more prevalent because we've got more people here.
Or it's been shoved in people's faces a little bit.
Or it could just be a hot topic for media, and that's surpassed other things at the same time. Obviously, we've had a lot of very serious...
we shouldn't be underplaying that.
No, there's been a lot of serious matters in our region lately. It's not just our region, it's a lot of regions that are having similar, more escalating behaviours, I suppose you would say. So I guess the question is, what is the root cause of that? And we saw a lot of social shift with COVID as well.
Yep.
A lot of mindsets changed. We saw a lot more disbursement into the regions because they realised they didn't have to work in the cities anymore. And so it'd be interesting to have a look at why people have left the cities and moved to the regions. It could very well be a socioeconomic issue, that they couldn't afford to live in the cities anymore, disperse back out into the regions, and therefore we're seeing a higher population growth of people who are more susceptible to engaging in criminal behaviours because of their socioeconomic position. It could be that we're seeing a lot of people not having their basic needs met, and because their basic needs aren't being met, they're just not engaging in the community in the way that we would expect them to engage.
Yeah, I think community expectation plays a huge part in it. I know some of the questions that I'm going to ask you, you'll only be able to answer in a very generalised manner, and I have the greatest respect for that. But In terms of, let's say just offenders in general, without necessarily going down the youth path, do they have a concept of the penalties will fit the crime?
Well, so that, again, that's a very difficult question because we do have a legal system in place.
Yep.
And that's why we have defence lawyers and we have prosecution. So the prosecution will allege the offences.
Which normally would be the QPS?
Yeah, so Queensland Police Service has their prosecutors that will appear in court and make the allegations against the defendant.
Yes.
And the defendant will have their lawyer, who's the criminal defence lawyer.
Yep.
But I get asked this question very often, how do you defend guilty people? Well,
sure.
My job as a defence lawyer is not to necessarily defend guilty people, but it's to make sure that all of the processes and procedures have been done properly to make sure this person is in fact guilty. And then if they are guilty, what the appropriate penalty would be based on precedents and community expectations. So specific and general deterrence. Specific deterrence for that person, how do we make sure that any penalty will stop them doing it again?
Mm-hmm.
And then general deterrence for how community expectations on what will happen to you if you commit this offence.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I like to watch a good courtroom movie and all the rest of it, So
do I.
Will I always say, I never ask my client whether they're guilty or not. So I assume that's the case, yeah.
Well, it is one of those things where you do obtain instructions, obviously.
Of course.
But the key thing is making sure that the process is fair and that all of the information is provided to the court to make the appropriate decision.
So if I could just unpack that in a really simplistic way, when you say obtain instructions, if I say to you I didn't do it, you don't say, well, I think you did.
No, it's not up to me to decide. The only person that can decide your guilt is the magistrate or the judge, depending on which court you're in.
Yeah, fair enough.
So it's about making sure that there is no chance that an innocent person can go to prison.
Sure.
So there's this saying, it's called the Blackstone principle. It's better 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person
goes to prison. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. In your experience then, do you find generally that if people who might find themselves on the wrong side of the law for whatever particular reasons, that can be traced back to trauma or traced back to disassociation in society? Is it, or is that a generalisation? I mean, are there factors that you find are contributing more often than not?
This sounds like something I'll be exploring in my PhD, which I had a meeting about yesterday.
Well, I'm not equipped to go down that track.
I'm not equipped to go down that path at the moment either. But I will be doing a joint PhD with a psychiatrist as well. Okay. So we'll be able to explore some of those issues. We haven't quite narrowed down. We've got a topic, but it will be a lot more narrow than just broad offender profiling. Yeah.
Oh, well, as a general person who doesn't know anything about it, I would suspect that there would be some levels of commonality across that, like a cluster of people who get sick in a certain place for no particular reason. There's usually some environmental or reason for that. And I would imagine when it comes to offending, a lot of people don't always enjoy the happy home upbringing that many of us in Australia really hope for, and that can really, childhood trauma can be quite a significant predictor of future behaviour.
But people also make mistakes. So there's also not necessarily setting out to do something wrong, but for whatever reason there's some pressure or there's some error in judgment that can also wind them in court. They can also wind up in court.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing that you say, because over the context of these podcast series, we've had a lot of people come on here, and many of them are talking about health issues and all the rest of it, and the contribution of stress in their life, and how that it impairs decision-making ability.
Absolutely.
And when you're under duress, you might be doing something that otherwise you wouldn't normally be doing, and sometimes the consequences are benign, and sometimes they're pretty serious.
And sometimes it's really difficult when you're in that stress situation to see the consequences.
Yes.
It's about survival and getting through what you're experiencing at the moment. Yeah. And again, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't understand. I can't claim to be an expert on the outcomes of stress, but a lot of the time when people are under stress, they make poor decisions.
And I think to summarise that point a little bit, I look at that and I think to myself, sometimes I search to understand why do people do the things that they do. And some people that I know who've done things not that I think, well, what did you do that for? It's really our character for you.
Yep, and why stress might be very different to your stress and the stress tolerance depending on your experiences in life. So, and that could come back to your question about childhood trauma. Is with that childhood trauma, some stress might be a lot less for one person than it is for somebody else.
Yeah, so I guess in the same way that we would say one bad day is not a bad life, one bad decision doesn't mean you're a bad person.
No, but it could wind you in court and then with...
Well, that's what I call someone like you. Yeah. And then with your success rate, I'll be pretty well looked after. Okay, so talk to me about... so I'm just a mum and dad housewife living in Hervey Bay, and, I've had a pretty mundane life. I've never found myself across any legal issues, I suppose, of a criminality nature. If I'm looking at my health toolkit in terms of the way I live my life, what are the things that I need to be conscious of from a legal perspective? If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, or what should I be doing?
Absolutely. Well, I think I'm going to be shamelessly self-promoting here.
Why not?
But you need
to
have
forum for it.
A lawyer on your speed dial.
Yep.
Because I think one of the things that people forget is lawyers are a bit like GPs for your general health. We look after your wills and enduring powers of attorney. So those are your two documents that will protect your assets should something happen to you. An enduring power of attorney will give someone the legal power to look after your things if you're still alive but not capable of making decisions or legal decisions or medical decisions. And your will direct, it'll leave someone in charge and then direct that person in charge as to how to distribute your assets should you pass away.
Sure.
So it's particularly an issue for split families, which is a lot more prevalent these days as well.
Yes.
When you've got two families, it could be hotly contested, I suppose, if you pass away without a will. Where should your assets go? Who should get your assets? Do you want them to pass down to your children, or do you want them to go to your spouse and then to your spouse's children?
Yeah. We had Dr. Nick Yim as one of the guests on this podcast. He's a local AMA man, and he was talking about people who come to see him and how that has his shift now is on preventative as opposed to, I've got a sore back, so here's a sore back pills. So what you're talking about is very much a similar sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's the same across if you're a business owner as well, making sure that you've got your policies and procedures in place. So say you're about to dismiss someone from their employment, making sure that you understand the compliance required to do that effectively so that you don't wind up in front of the Fair Work Commission. Work cover as well. What do you need to know in terms of your compliance with work cover, and if there was to be a claim, what do you have to do? What is the procedure?
Sure, yeah.
And even just terms and conditions in invoicing. How do you make sure that you protect yourself when you're contracting with a customer? There's all sorts of things that...
All sorts of stuff.
People don't necessarily... Their first thought isn't, I should go and speak to a lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, how interesting. I guess, again, as a layperson who has a very limited understanding of the legal process, and you see things and you read things, it's good to, ask someone who knows that. Let's play a bit of Mythbusters, I suppose. So, if I'm the only child left out of the will because mum and dad didn't like me as much as everybody else, but it was their express wishes in the will that you don't get anything, I can contest that, no problem, and I'll win. Is it fair or unfair assessment?
So I'm going to be painful and give you my lawyer answer, which is it depends.
Okay. Yeah.
So it all depends on the circumstances.
Yeah.
It all depends on why. There could have been some conduct that you're not disclosing that was contrary to their moral obligations to you, I suppose. Yeah. So there could have been you're very successful, and so the other siblings need more support than you. There's all sorts of
so there could be
reasons why you're not going to always be successful.
No, and I think it gets a lot back to it's talk around the offices, and everyone's a bush lawyer and thinks that they know more about it than what they do. But these are common things that you hear people talk about. Like if I move in a lot of business circles, and people will often say, "Well, all I've got to do is give them a written warning, and then if they don't do the things that I want them to do, then I'm quite within my rights to dismiss them," which I would imagine is also not the case.
It depends.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
And there are procedures, obviously, that need to be followed, and that's the same with contesting an estate. There are procedures, there are time frames. So it is always, it depends. So your best bet is to go and see a lawyer as soon as possible if you've got any question about what you should be doing, or even for the preventative, to come in and say, I've just started a new business, I'm employing staff, what do I need to know?
Yeah. And for that mum and dad who's looking about, okay, how do I make sure I set myself up for the future? What are the first steps for them? So they come in and they sit down with you. Do you want to get a whole landscape about what their life looks like?
Absolutely. And I'll ask some questions that seem completely irrelevant, but it usually gives me information that they wouldn't give to me voluntarily because they don't think that it's relevant to their planning. And then something will pop out and we'll go, well, that's relevant.
And that's just experience, isn't it? Like of knowing what might happen. So I'll ask that question now because that's a preventative mechanism as well.
But I also like to understand my clients as well when they come in to see me, because the more that I understand them as humans, the easier it is to help them plan for what it is they're hoping to achieve. The more that I can understand about who they are, what they've done and where they're going, I can help them figure out what they want to achieve. What's the purpose? What's the goal? What are you wanting to leave at the end of the day?
So when little Melissa was at school, did you always have a burning passion that I want to get into law? This is going to be the game for me?
So yes and no.
Well, there's a whole lot of yes and no's with you.
It depends on what day of the week you ask me, I suppose.
I'm not asking you whether you still enjoy it. I'm asking you whether that was your game plan.
No, well, and that was the thing. I didn't know what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I'd initially, when I hit year 11, I decided I wanted to be a physio because I was playing elite level sport, and I thought...
What were you doing?
I was a softball player.
Okay.
So I was playing for New South Wales and ACT in softball. And then so I decided physio was a way to go, enrolled in all the science subjects, and then I did a statement of attainment in massage therapy at TAFE after hours so that I could get the extra anatomy that I needed to be able to go into uni as an undergrad in physio. But during that massage course, I had to actually touch people, and I realised fairly early on I'm just not a tactile person. So a job involving touching people was never going to be a job that I would enjoy.
Of course.
And I had this vision in my head that I'd only be looking after athletes, which obviously is not the case for physiotherapists. But also athletes have a few other issues, such as athlete's foot, which is something I have a real problem with. Feet.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
So that was...
I'm wearing shoes in case you're wondering.
I'm also wearing shoes today. So I was 15 when I made that realisation, but I'd already picked my subjects for high school. So I finished out year 12, but I didn't sit the SATs because at that point, my career aspirations, I didn't know what I wanted to do.
I understand.
So I went and got a Certificate 3 in business as a traineeship and worked full-time while I was doing my traineeship, and I finished my Certificate 3 in 10 days, but there was a minimum requirement of 3 months. So I got signed off at the end of the 3 months, and then I did work experience for another 12 months, and then I enrolled in the undergraduate in business and did that. And while I was doing the business degree, I got exposed to accounting and to law.
Okay.
Absolutely loved the law, but my grades were probably credit distinction average.
Yes.
Accounting, I sat the managerial accounting exam a week after I gave birth and got 98%.
Wow.
So decided...
You're such an underachiever.
Accounting came more naturally. And I do like numbers, and spreadsheets are a big thing for me. And I did forecasting, and all of that is one of my favorite de-stressors. I'll sit and just type in Excel and create pivot tables and do all sorts of things as a
on a
stress
Friday
relief.
night when you've got nothing else to do.
Pretty much.
Yeah, gotcha.
And then, so from there, I went and I did the graduate program at the Bureau of Statistics. So I was doing statistical publications, and I got a rotation in legislation and compliance and did census prosecutions. So
what does that mean? It sounds interesting. What does that mean?
Very interesting. If you breach the Census Act, you can be prosecuted for it. So I was able to liaise with the CDPP and progress matters for census prosecution.
So how do you breach the do you leak information about the census to people?
No, it's more not complying with requirements to complete census information. So
Okay, there you go.
yeah, so that was interesting. So I started my grad dip in legal studies while I was doing my graduate year, and then I got a job as a financial analyst for the government as well. So that was statistical modelling, and I did some actuarial courses while I was there as well, and became a GICD, a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors.
Wow.
And started my master's in forensic accounting.
Yeah.
Because that was a combination of both the law
Yes.
and the accounting. So I thought that was a really good path to go down. And I did forensic accounting as a consultant for the government for a number of years, until I realised that defence is really where I wanted to be,
Okay.
rather than investigations. So
Why do you say that? Like, why do you want to be on the defence and not on the attack?
I think for me it's about protecting innocence.
Yeah.
So making sure that if people are accused of doing something, that they've got the right of reply and the right to respond, and they've got someone there that can help them with that.
Yeah.
And that to make sure that those procedures are done properly. So I did my Juris Doctor and then got admitted as a lawyer.
I'm getting a sense of an undertone with you that you have a acute awareness that you always want what's right and what's wrong to be done. Like you there's no level of grey area there.
I just don't want people to be unfairly punished. I think
Yeah.
that's always been something for me that's been really important, making sure that they're not accused of things that they haven't done, or unjustly or harshly punished for things because of their circumstances.
Do you think that happens?
I think we've got a really good system at the moment that takes that into account. But I think one of the issues that we've got is the community perception of sentencing, that maybe the community is not aware of what goes into sentencing, what the factors are that get taken into consideration, because not everyone's had a privileged upbringing, unfortunately. And I think one of the things that we often overlook is all of the contributing factors to that behaviour, and what we as a community should be doing to support people to stop that.
It's interesting. That's a really interesting point that you make, because I think as I've made my journey through life, I am starting to lean more towards the fact that we slant in a torch and pitchfork more mentality more so than we do of an understanding mentality. And I'm not really sure whether that's caused by sensationalised media coverage that whips people into a frenzy where we all must gather together and storm the gates, or whether or not people are genuinely really concerned about what's going on.
I think, and this is a big generalisation because I am still very young, so I grew up with access to a lot of technology and information, but we are in an information age now. We have progressed to having instant access to information, which we probably didn't have. I got my first computer in 1993, I think, and the internet maybe the year 2000 or somewhere around there. I might have had the internet slightly earlier, but certainly not the same degree of access to information that we have now. It's on our phones, it's on our watches. It's
everything.
Yeah,
There's no question that cannot be answered.
You can ask your car. I can ask my car a question and it will answer me. It will often tell me, I can't answer you right now, or I don't know what you're asking me.
Like most of the questions that I've tried to ask you today, I can't answer that question. I'm sorry.
It depends.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so I think just the access to information just makes everything a bit more prevalent than it ever used to be. We used to wait for the paper to come out on a Saturday morning to find out what the latest news was.
Yeah.
Whereas now we get an alert on our phone within 20 seconds of it being uploaded. So,
and I think it's what that has also done is born a generation of experts.
well, the issue is we've got so much information is how do you filter through
How do you
that now?
decipher what's real and what's not?
And the research component of it is enormous now because you're having to filter through what is legitimate and what is just someone's opinion that they've posted online, what is actually researched and thought about and is a genuine opinion as opposed to just a thought that pops into someone's head that they publish.
I'll give you another it depends question. I sometimes, I don't know whether it's because of the circles that I move in or not, I sometimes hear this term that white-collar crime in this country is disproportionately punished because if Mavis takes $100,000 from the bowls club, she's going to the clink for 3 years. But if I run over someone and maim them, I might get a 9-month suspended from driving sentence.
So I mentioned earlier that my master's degree is in forensic accounting. So that is actually a really, that's an area that I am legitimately passionate about as well. White collar crime is very interesting because a lot of people don't see the harm in it, but there is a lot of harm that happens because of that white collar crime.
What I'm interpreting you saying is that people in the community might think it's a victimless crime, but it's actually not.
And it's generally, there's what's called the fraud triangle, which is 3 elements that are always present in a fraud, which is pressure, opportunity, and rationalisation. And the rationalisation bit is a really interesting bit. It's my money, it didn't hurt anybody, they've got insurance for it anyway.
Okay.
Who has it really harmed? I didn't kill anybody. All of that sort of stuff. And don't get me wrong, I am opposed to sentencing in prison for those sorts of behaviours, but sometimes that is appropriate. And it comes back to that, it depends. What was the actual harm?
Yep.
What sort of a general deterrent and specific deterrent are we needing to provide to the community? If it was up to me, I'd be stripping away their qualifications, making sure that they didn't have the opportunity to commit the offences going forward and make a spectacle about what they've done and who it impacted and how it harmed people, because their reputation probably means more to them than the money.
Than the transactional part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, fair enough.
And if we look at prison, what are we trying to achieve with prison? Is it rehabilitation? Is it punishment? Or is it getting people off the streets to prevent physical harm? And so if we have a look at all of the elements, again, it depends. So the fraudster who goes around ripping off old people with fake invoices might be very different to the stockbroker.
Gotcha. To circle right back to where we started, I guess, and that is, people in the community's expectation, I suppose, about youth crime and people's expectations about a whole stack of other things. And to your point, people think that, because of a lack of understanding that no one's ever punished harshly enough. I wonder whether the term rehabilitation is a fitting one for people who end up in correctional facilities.
If there was an easy answer to the question, someone would have found it years ago.
Gotcha.
And I'm not smart enough to answer the question.
Yep.
But maybe we do just need to sit back and look at it and go, what is the root cause here? Is it us as a community treating people unfairly?
Yeah.
Or is it people within the community feeling like they've been treated unfairly? What can we do to stop it?
It's a pretty complex issue.
It is a complex.
Let's switch gears to something that's not very complex.
Okay.
What's a piece of advice that you could go back to young Melissa and give to her now that you wish you'd known when you were that age?
That taking some time off when you're young is not a bad thing.
Right.
I think people are so keen to figure out what they want to do and how they're going to do it. They put so much pressure on themselves to achieve in high school, not realising that what happens in high school doesn't matter 20 years down the track. You've got every opportunity. You can do whatever you want. There's no shackles. There is a way. If you're driven enough, there is a way to find out how to do what you want. And yes, I was very privileged growing up. So it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, I did what I did. I had the opportunities. But I also didn't take the easy path either. I dropped out in year 12 and still got through uni, still got 2 master's degrees.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. My wife and I, we've had a number of kids go through year 12, and by the time they're in the middle of year 10, the pressure's on them to tell me right now what you want to do for the rest of your life. I mean, I'm shortly be 52 years old. I have no idea what I want to do with the rest of my life.
And taking a couple of years off doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Taking a career break, not putting that pressure on yourself to be working 24 hours a day. And I'm very hypocritical sitting here saying that, but I am 20 odd years down the track now, and looking back at my early career, I wouldn't even take annual leave because I thought that I had to be there working hard every day. But at the end of the day, you've got to look after yourself, because if you don't look after yourself, your health, your mental health, then you just get to burnout, and your career hasn't really progressed that much further than if you've taken the time to look after yourself.
It's a Saturday night, and you don't have anything to do, and there's no Excel spreadsheets available. What would you spend your time doing?
I have never been in that position before. I'd probably jump on the treadmill and catch up on some trashy TV show.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. Not that this is likely going to happen to you, but you're down to your last $10. What do you think you would spend it on?
I feel like you've asked me this question before.
I ask everybody this question because it's one of my favourite ones.
Trying to come up with something that doesn't make me sound like I'm an alcoholic or...
I don't think
a nice bottle of wine would be nice.
Bottle of wine, I don't know.
But I don't think you can get one for $10.
I don't drink wine, I don't drink coffee, so that's been some of the most frequent answers to that question. As a part of the LiveWell podcast series, we are making a donation to a charity that's important to the person who has given up their valuable time, as of you certainly have today, and you're a very busy person, and we really appreciate you being here. Who would you like that donation to go to?
I would like that to go to Partners in Care, which is the hospital foundation that looks after the Wide Bay hospitals.
Yeah.
It's the foundation that raises money and supports the hospitals in purchasing equipment that they wouldn't otherwise be able to purchase through the HHS.
Yes.
But also provides scholarships for doctors, nurses, and for education for people who work in the hospitals in the region as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Melissa, for coming in and talking to us on the LiveWell podcast. And I think the overriding message out of this, for all the things that we've talked about, is that you just don't go and see someone like you when you're in trouble. Go there when you want to make sure that the rest of your life is going to be a smooth one as best as you can.
And the answer to your question is always, it depends.
Thanks, Mel.